to answer three questions. The first one is what factors led immigrants to come in our country. The other one is how do they compare to natives in terms of demographics and especially in terms of employment and welfare assimilation. Okay? So let's see if I can do this. So as you know, there's been an unprecedented immigration boom in Spain that happened over a very short period of time. And this is very unique. This massive, basically, the immigrant population went from 4% of the total population in the year 2000 to 14% nowadays. That represented an average flow of 500,000 immigrants per year. And this is brutal. This is a lot. And the only country that I know of that has received these massive immigration inflows is Israel. Okay? So that's the first point. So here's the chart where you can see that we had very few foreigners. It's the percentage of foreign-born population relative to the total population. So we had very few prior to the turn of the century, and it increased drastically. It soared. And after the crisis, it has kind of stabilized. And this is data from El Padrón. So it should be including illegal immigrants. Okay? So the next question is, what factors explain this surge in immigration? And let me tell you just up front that Spain has not had an active policy of attracting immigrants. It was not a desire. But there were some factors that will explain why we got immigrants to come to this country. The first one was that at the turn of the century, we had a booming economy. On top of that, there was a social promotion of the native population in the form of increased education, especially women, and increased labor force participation. So what this implied was that there was a big increase in the demand of foreign labor. Right? And Libertad is going to talk a little bit more about this, but basically what happened is all of a sudden we needed to construct a lot of buildings and we needed somebody to do that. And all of a sudden women were going to work and we needed somebody to take care of, we needed cheap childcare and immigrants did that. And also we need people to take care of our elderlies and immigrants did that. So there was a big increase in the labor demand of immigrants. But that's not sufficient. We also need a big increase in the labor supply of immigrants, and this can be explained by this. We are nearby Africa, so that's a good source of immigrants, and we also share language and culture with Latin America. However, we've always been close to Africa, and we've also always shared the culture with Latin America. So something else may have happened. And what happened was there were two different things. One was in the 80s, Northern European countries decided to be much more restrictive with immigrants, and they kind of stopped the flows of immigrants, especially from Africa, from the old colonies. So that's one factor. The other one was 9/11, 2001 in the United States, implied that the United States became much more restrictive with the arrival of their Latin American immigrants. So that combined with an Equatorian crisis meant that we started having a big flow of immigrants arriving. Okay? The same thing with Romanians. Germans do not let Romanians go to Germany, but therefore they come to our country. Okay? So that's the thing. And then we need another thing, which is the barriers. And we had laws, but they were not enforced. So basically, one thing that helped a lot for these immigrants to arrive was that the Spanish weak governmental capacity to regulate the inflow of immigrants. That combined with 6 amnesties that basically imply that if you were an immigrant that wanted to come to Spain, you came with as a tourist. Most of the times you didn't even need a visa at the beginning. You arrived, you started working, and eventually an amnesty will provide you with legal residency and work permit. And let me show you. These are the amnesties. This is from Aitor Lacuesta's and co-author's paper. And these are the different amnesties. And what you can see is, well, the year of the amnesty, the number of immigrants that got regularized, and as we go down, the last one was more than 500 immigrants became legal. The benefits are very large. At the beginning, basically, you just got granted residency and work permit. As we move towards nowadays, the benefits become a bit more limited, but not that limited, right? Because They give you 1 year residence and work permit, and you can renew that as long as you're employed. And being employed in the year 2000, 2001, 2005 was very easy. So pretty much it's a large benefit that it gives, these amnesties. And finally, to be eligible, it's pretty easy. So, well, in 1985, it was as easy as just being in the country. All unauthorized workers and residents could be granted amnesty. As we go down, or as we get closer to nowadays, it becomes, quote unquote, a bit more difficult, but it's not that much, right? Here it means that the amnesty was, I think, in the second part of the year, so this means you had been in the country for at least a couple of months. In 2005, you had to prove that you had a job offer lasting at least 6 months. But that, again, was not very difficult in 2005. Okay, so this really explains why immigrants arrive. So over time, there's been a big change on the origin. And of course, they're younger than the native population. But also, it's important to see that over time, the continent of origin of immigrants has changed a lot. So in the 1990s, they were mainly from EU 15 countries and Africa. And here, it's a lot of Moroccans. Recently, there's been a big share of other Europeans. And here you can think of Romanians and Latin Americans, okay? And there's much less from EU 15 countries. So the three most important nationalities are Moroccans, which represent, I think, 16% of the immigrant population, Romanians, and Ecuadorians. And I think Ecuadorians are about almost 20%, and Romanians are a bit below Moroccans, about 15% or 13%, okay? So that's how they look. Another thing that I want you to think about is most people think that immigrants are low educated, and that's not correct. If you compare to natives, so this is using labor force survey, and it's the natives, high school, there were 34% of high school dropouts. This is between 2000 and 2009. There were 34% of high school dropouts, 50% of high school grads, and 16% of college graduates in the native population. So let's look at, so for instance, the blue line is dropouts by continent of origin of the immigrants. And you can see clearly that except for Africans, the dropout rate of the immigrants that reside in Spain is much lower than that of natives. Okay, that's one thing. In terms of high school graduation, it's much higher. And education, college is pretty much the same. So that's one thing that, you know, people tend to think that immigrants are less educated than natives. That's not necessarily true. So how do immigrants compare to natives in terms of employment? Here the idea is like, one thing that's clear is immigrants that come to Spain, regardless of their education level, they come to work, okay? So if you look at it, and once they enter, they start working. And that's true for men and women, regardless of whether they're legal or illegal. So the labor force participation of immigrants, men and women, is much higher than that of male and female at arrival. Okay, so that's the first thing. Immigrants come and they get the first job they can get, regardless of their education. So usually what happens is they start with a very low-skill qualified job, and within 2 or 3 years, they move towards blue-collar qualified job or a white-collar job, depending on whether they're males or females and their skill level. Okay, so the Spanish labor market has been, this is prior to the crisis, of course, but has been absorbing these immigrants very well. The problem is that research, there's research out there that says that although we absorb them very well, we relegate them to temporary contract jobs, to more vulnerable work positions, okay? So that is a problem. And San Román and co-authors have found that one of the problems is that the returns to human capital acquired in the country of origin are much lower for immigrants than for natives. So one of the results that is different from the international literature is that there's strong occupational segregation at all levels. So usually in countries with a tradition of receiving immigrants, what happens is, and these immigrants take the first job they can get, and then they move to a job that matches their qualification, their human capital. So low skills tend to eventually converge to an occupational distribution of low skilled natives, and college educated tend to converge to an occupational distribution similar to that of natives with a college degree. What we have found is that this is not true in Spain. In Spain, we find that males with a low skill males are converging within 4 or 5 years to the occupational distribution of natives, low skill natives. But that is not true for college educated males. So it's very difficult for college educated males who arrive to Spain to eventually end up in jobs that should be similar to the jobs that natives with a college degree have. Okay, so that's the first point. And for women, it's even worse because there's no convergence whatsoever, not even for the low skill. Okay, so I think this is something that is quite interesting, and one might be thinking of the reasons behind it. And of course, one of them is the labor market segmentation that we have in this market. There's others. Here, this research, or these results, are with the labor force survey, and it includes both formal and informal workers on the one hand, and on the other, the education is self-reported. So there might be a concern here that what happens really is that immigrants tell me they have a college degree, and that's not true. They have something like a vocational degree, and so that would be a concern. So what I did is looked at Social Security records and look at what happens with those immigrants who are legalized, who are formal. So in the Social Security records, we only have people that are already legal and that have a work permit and these are wage and salary workers, okay? And what I'm doing here is I'm comparing the wage of natives to that of immigrants, controlling for observable characteristics, region where they live, everything, experience, and years of assimilation. And this is so the Social Security records measures very poorly education, but it gives me the occupation of the worker. And the occupation is like, usually an employer will give you a professional education because he has checked your degree. So in some ways, the categories here are not self-reported. There's not the problem of misreporting education, okay? So if we look at professional category, we see that at arrival, this is not at arrival, sorry. Once they become legal and get a wage and salary job, immigrants make about 50% lower wages than natives with similar characteristics, okay? And it's true that there is some convergence, but after 10 years, the difference is still 30%. That's very, very big. We can see that this holds among the occupational category where the requirement is a high school degree. The initial wage gap when they're first legalized is about 45%, and it drops to 35%. And for those with no degree, it goes from 22%. So there is some assimilation, but assimilation is not perfect. Well, far from perfect. And also notice that the wage gap between immigrants and natives, it's much smaller among the no degree category than the high degree. This is not typical in the literature. This is quite a different result than what most people find in, so for instance, in the US or the UK. So there's several factors that can explain this, but I think this is a quite interesting result that is different from most traditional receiving immigrants. So Germans want qualified immigrants, but they get paid pretty much the same than natives. They'll get very well treated because they really want them. Here it's not the case. Okay, so let's move on. What about welfare benefit? So let's compare welfare usage of immigrants and natives. So a lot of people think that, oh, they're very costly to us. They spend a lot of money. So let me tell you about the research I've done. I've looked at cash benefit social programs. What are cash benefit social programs? There's the ones that I listed here. So basically there's two types. The ones where you have to contribute, so unemployment benefits, disability, survivor's pension. So to get these benefits, the amount you get depends on how much it depends basically on your employment history. And these are non-contributory, and you get them regardless of whether you work or not. So to be able to receive these benefits, you either have to be a native who has contributed to Social Security or a legal immigrant who has contributed to Social Security, these ones, right? You have to contribute to Social Security. To receive these, you have to be you have to be a legal immigrant. Okay? You cannot receive it if you're illegal, but you don't have to have contributed. So you can be a legal immigrant working in the informal sector or a native working in the informal sector. And then we have the universal rights, which is education and health, and those everybody can get, even if they're illegal. Okay, so, but I'm not going to talk about those. We can discuss it later. I know little, but I can tell you what I know. So, regarding these different components, this is very quickly, compared to European countries, how much benefits does Spain give? And this is just to get you a very clear idea that we don't have too many good benefits. We fare pretty bad, and the only place where we fare well is in unemployment insurance, okay? And this is because of the crisis that it has increased, okay? So that said, now let me tell you a little bit how welfare, cash welfare participation of immigrants compared to that of natives. So here's basically what happens is, okay, this is by type of receipt, and this is using everybody, not distinguishing by continent. And what you can see is that at arrival, so for all the benefits except for UI, immigrants receive less cash benefits than natives, always. And it's true, and once you control for all the observables and family characteristics and it really holds. So this idea that immigrants are receiving benefits, cash benefits, it's not true, not relative. And this is important because in Spain, all these benefits are very, very small. But immigrants are even receiving much less. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. Okay, so the only place where immigrants receive benefits is the UI. But they only start, so when they first arrive in the country, the first 4 or 5 years, this is with the labor force survey, so it includes illegal immigrants. Okay? So when they first arrive, they're much less likely to receive unemployment insurance. Why? Because either they work in the informal sector, or even if they were in the formal sector, they haven't had enough employment history. And as time goes by, they kind of assimilate into unemployment insurance. And of course, we see a big peak because with the crisis, immigrants who are the ones with the more vulnerable positions and with temporary contracts are the first ones to become unemployed, okay, and to receive unemployment insurance. So this is by continent of origin. The UI receipt difference. So this is basically this blue line by continent of origin. So the only ones that are kind of the natives are the EU15, which makes sense. And here you can see this is disability, but this holds for any other recipe, any other receipt, all the other benefits. They're much less likely to receive benefits than the natives. And again, remember that the level of benefits is very low. So some food for thought, and this is my last slide. So I think that it would be good for us to think about what are the reasons for the imperfect substitution among high-skilled natives and high-skilled immigrants. So also, what are the consequences for the Spanish economic growth of undervaluing this large inflow of high-skilled immigrants? Third point, what are the social, economic, and welfare consequences of having so many immigrants in so vulnerable positions? Because now with the crisis, we know these people are all becoming unemployed, and once the UI benefits run out, there's nothing. And finally, I think that it's also important, part of why the rigidity of the Spanish labor market is probably one of the key elements. It's not the only one, and we can discuss, but it's probably one of them. Thank you.